Hi everyone, back to my teapot. Unfortunately, I did a bunch of work and filmed it for YouTube upload and it didn't work. Somehow there was an error after an hour-long demonstration that got me here. Because if you watch the first part of the teapot, I actually had two teapot videos. One was a pinch pot, two hemispheres I put together. This is how far I got with the next step, but I lost it. So technical difficulties. So what I thought I would do is just pick up here, and you'll learn a lot about how to finish the teapot, and I can discuss what I did, and then we can pick up and show you individually or later, or do another one or something like that. But I think this will be helpful. So let's look at what I have here. I'm going to bring it a little bit closer. So this is not finished. The teapot is actually enclosed. There's no cut lid yet. The handle has been put on there, and the spout is actually solid. So this is one way to make a teapot, is to close off some space, some air in there. Throw it on the wheel, you can do that. You can two pinch pots together, score and slip, attach them. Then you can manipulate the shape. I made these kind of four-sided lobed forms, four lobes. Then you can add a knob before you cut the lid, and you can even add a solid spout and a handle temporarily. So why don't I show you what the next steps would be. Before I take it apart, hollow out the spout, and then reassemble it and cut the lid, let's talk about the teapot form a little bit. So if you look here, I've tried to balance visually the weight, the visual weight of the spout and the handle. So the negative space inside of the handle should be about the same size as the spout. You also want to look at the spout. I'm going to use this stick here as a line. The T would go up to the bottom of the lid, and my spout's too high. So before I get too far, I'm going to adjust my spout. Let's see if I can just pull this off. It's stuck a little more than I wanted it to. Let me get some tools here. I'm going to cut it off. In the first video, I said I wasn't going to use the banding wheel. And I won't use it in any way that I can't do without it, but it's convenient, I think, for me to use, and it's here, and it will help my video be a little bit shorter in duration. Okay, that was pretty stuck on there. That's okay. So look, it's solid, and then there's where it was attached. I'm going to blend this back in and scrape off the excess. And then let's make the spout just a little bit smaller. I have this nice wire here. I'm going to cut it with a wire, just like I cut the slabs, flat on the table, and just cutting off about 1/8 of an inch. I already cut off about 1/8. When I cut it off the teapot, there's another one. It's a little bit askew, so I can straighten it up by using the table. So this is a good start. And now, if I put it a little lower than I had, that's better. And now the bottom is hitting this line that I had designed in. And the bottom of the handle hits that line, so that's a good guideline. The top of the handle and the inside is about the same as there. So look at balance between handle and spout. Okay, so when I hand build, I like to put things on temporarily before I attach them, so that I can adjust like I just did. Cut it off again, right? reconfigure it and put it back on. I'm now looking straight, so I line up the handle and the spout. I like the spouts that have a little bit of a curve to it. And so this one I just shaped by hand. I'll show you how to do it from the start in a second. But I'm going to get this firming up and so I can attach it. Okay, so I mentioned that both the handle and the spout were on there temporarily. I'm going to use a tool to make a mark. This is maybe not the best tool. Tool's ready. The wooden tool is a better one. Or a pencil is even better. I got one of those here. Yeah, I like using pencils a lot to mark. Okay, and now I'm going to do the same last minute adjustments to the handle. And then, so I don't twist it when I put it on, I'm going to make a register. So I'm going to make a line that goes from there to there. And I have to put it back on. Okay, so now this should come off because I didn't stick it on there. So that's now shaped to the teapot. I'm going to set that under a lamp that I have here with a hot bulb in it, a heat lamp. Firm that up just a little bit while I cut off the handle. Why can't I just leave the handle on there? Because I actually didn't do a great job attaching it. It was kind of a temporary attachment to see how I liked it. And then I'm going to cut it off, set it aside, and then show you a real good attachment in a moment. Kind of lost my mark a little bit on the top one, but I saw where it was. Get there. Okay, so I have that for the body, and I can show you a little bit more here. I put a knob on there, and that's just attached as an extra ball of clay that I shaped, and then that's the design I came up with. So I'll set that aside there for a second. Okay, so to make this initially solid lump of clay, you just make it. So using some soft clay here, what I would suggest is to make a spike. I use a lot of pinching techniques, even for things that aren't pinch pots, even for like a spout. So put it on here. And I'm just pinching. When I go straight up first, and then I'll show you. If you're throwing it on the wheel, you would do a similar shape, but it would be hollow. Okay, so I could spend a little time. I could smooth it out with my finger. And then the end I'm going to flatten and reshape a little bit. So I have a spike there. Now I'm going to bend the spike over. This is how I get that curve. So it should look really bent, and I can reshape it a little bit if it got a little bit fat. I don't want it too fat. So it should look really bent over like that. Then if I went to put this on the pot, sticky clay here, it wouldn't work that good. See? It goes down. So what you need to do is cut it at an angle. You can hold it back here and line it up. I'm using the video as a mirror, which is kind of helpful. Mirrors are helpful in the studio sometimes. So I'm going to make a line with my hand, my finger, about where to cut it. So I made a line there. And that's the angle that I'm going to cut with the wire. So then, watch this. If I put this straight here, it's no longer quite so bent over, right? It's just curved. Then when I put it on the pot, it lines up like that, see? So that's how I did that. I'm going to keep that and show you the angle there. See that? It's cut like that. So that's how I got to that stage. I'm going to set this one aside and show you another way to do it while we firm this sucker up. All right. These I made, and they're hollow. So you don't have to work solid. You can use a slab. So I have a slab here. Let me move this away. And I'll make a hollow handle. Somewhere here I have a guideline for myself. Huh? I lost it. That's okay, I'll freehand it. Okay, so if I roll this slab into a cone, it's kind of hard to do when you have like a square slab. So a shape that works better is more of a triangular shape, right? Because it's going to make a cone. And at the bottom and top of that, what is that, a trapezoid? Forgetting my elementary school geometry. That kind of triangular shape, I'll curve the top and bottom. So I'll show you in one moment. Let's make a good start. So the top and bottom are curved because when you roll it, that curve becomes kind of straight. It's a little bit firmer slab than I thought. And it's a little bit thicker than I need it to be. If I need to have a softer slab, I might have to shift gears a little bit. Oh, here's my guideline. I drew that there. So let's thin this slab out a bit, the rolling pin. Rolling pins actually work better on slabs that aren't too sticky. So the fact that this is dried up a little bit is a good thing for using the rolling pin. Otherwise it'll stick to your pin and roll into it, and that's no good. If you don't have a rolling pin, then you can bang it onto the surface with your hand or a tool, thin it out. Okay, and it kind of actually softened all the edges. So now if I roll this, I get the beginnings of a cone. It's not that conical. So let's make that shape more conical by making more of a triangle. So more of a triangle now. And I can just roll it. There we go. So one way you can do this, got a little bit of cracking on the slab because it was a little drier than I anticipated. When you get little small cracks, blend them in the tool. They're not catastrophic. If you can compress the clay, it works. And then a tiny bit of water. I'm going to, 1 drop of water on this whole thing. I'm going to blend that in for a moment and then let that fill those little cracks. Tiny bit of water is your friend. A lot of water is not when you're hand building. I'm going to set that down for a second. So that can make a kind of a cool handle. I mean a cool spout, even with the seam expressed or obvious. Here's a teapot. It's a wheel-thrown teapot, but it has a spout that has the seam intact. It shows. So that's one way to do it. And that would be scoring and slipping and attaching it right there. But if you want to avoid the seam, there's a couple ways. I'm going to do it this way, where I'm going to put it flat. Actually, before I do that, let me show you. There are like tools for making spouts, like this tapered tool. You put that in there, and you can work the spout pressing into the wood and you can squeeze the wood out, but you might not have that around. You might find something that works, like the handle of a paintbrush. This is a rubber tipped thing. And so maybe I'll use this in a moment, and you can see how that works as a helpful thing. But for starters, I'm going to put that seam together flat on this table here. So you see how that rolls there? I'm going to use some water and get the edge of this slab and the contact area of that part of the slab both wet. And because this slab is dried up a little bit, I do need to score it. If it was fresh and really soft, first one I didn't score it at all because the clay was so soft. But when the clay firms up, you need to score and wet, so you get some slip on the surface. Now I can press this down. And I'm using the board to press it into, so I'm not working up in midair. Okay, so there I'm pushing down. I have a finger inside to support it. I'm pushing down. And now I'm going to take a tool and compress the clay up from the bottom slab. Okay, so now it looks like that. And then with the finger inside, I can then press with the tool and pull that bottom, what was the kind of bottom part of the slab, so it really overlaps. And that's going to give me a nice strong attachment. And now one more drop of water on there to soften that, and I can use a finger back and forth and really blend it in and smooth it out. This tool can be handy to help with this as well, so I can score it over and over again over the seam so that it shreds the clay like raking the ground. Then I can turn it over, and the edge there helps to blend it in. When I was getting everything ready here, the weather warmed up a lot today, and so the slab dried out a little more than I expected. It's always a challenge working with clay, especially when you're doing several things. Keep the moisture content the way you want it. What do I do with that stick? I mean that. I had that long handled thing. I may have dropped it or something. That's okay, I'll use this one. I made this tool as one of those trimming tools, and I squeezed the ends so that I could stick it into things like this, and use that instead of my finger in there, and I can squeeze onto it. Whenever you get a little crack, because I said like mine's a little bit drier than I'd like, I could spray this and wrap it with plastic and it will soften up, but I can just compress those cracks with a tiny bit of water and I think I'll be okay. Anyway, I don't think I'll use this one, I just wanted to demonstrate it. And then this one's more of a tube-like one, so that could actually work with a smaller attachment onto the teapot, and then I could bend it right now. Yeah, that's not too bad. So a different style. You can go in there and also pinch this out, and you might end up with something with a little bigger attachment. Might be nice, and then you can shape this there. So a hollow one is possible with slabs. That's how I made a few of these. This one and this one here. Now, this one also has that same problem as the first one I made. I would have to cut this at that angle as well. So I'll show you that one more time, and then we'll do hollow out the other one. Doesn't want to cut through with the wire because it's hollow. But you know, the wire can be handy for is given a line, and then I can cut with the knife. on the line. There we go. So that could make a nice spout for that. A little bit low, needs to be up a little bit, like so. So I got a couple choices. I got this one, or I have the solid one. The solid one is firmed up. So back to this, and let's cut that and attach it. Attach the handle, cut the lid, and I think we might have a teapot. So I was just messing around with knives and wires. Sometimes a wire works better to cut clay, sometimes a knife works better. I'm going to try the wire to cut this in half. So I have a thumb on the back side of it. So there we go. You get a kind of a cool profile on the teapot spout. So you get a sense of a good shape for a teapot spout, or what I think is a good shape. And then you need to carve it out with your loop tool, like this. I'm going to use this little bucket for my scraps. So I would start by drawing a guideline for myself. Don't make it too thin initially. I'll make some marks. So there's where I'm going to remove. Clean my tool a little bit. Okay, holding it in my hand, I'm going to pull towards the thick side so that I don't mess up the thin spout. So start with the thicker area and carve it out. And leave it about the thickness of the wall of your teapot, if you can. Okay. So I carved out most of it. And then now I'm going to carve out the channel towards the end. Now, good teapot spouts are generally tapered the whole way, but the taper can become more of a pipe towards the end, like a cylinder. Actually, these teapot spouts sometimes do look like pipes, like old tobacco pipes. Okay, so I got to start here. I'm going to put this on the table, and then I'm going to get the other one and do the same. Guideline. Pulling towards the bottom. Channel. This one's a little bit firmer. It was sitting there while I was working on the other one. The tip of it's a little firmer. So this is kind of a sculptural method, or sculptor's method, to make something solid out of clay and carve it out. Usually in ceramics we teach a lot about building hollow. But sometimes this is an easy way to do stuff. It works best with smaller things. If you do something really large, you have to have clay that has a lot of grog in it. Otherwise you'll get a lot of cracks because you haven't compressed the clay in the same way as when you coil build or pinch pot or throw in the wheel or slab build. Solid and then carving, the downside is that the clay is not compressed in the same way. but for small stuff it works fine, and it works fine for really coarse clay. Okay, so another tool that's good for cleanup is a wooden tool. So after I use the scraper, I go through, and this will give me a cleaner surface. So I'll clean that up with a wooden tool, and then a little bit of water to smooth it out, but not too much. Okay, so that's how that half looks. Let's put this down. Okay, so before I get the two areas ready, I'll show you. I want to just do a test run here. So I'm going to put them back together. The end is not carved out enough yet, and that's okay, because I can do that after I put it together. So the end looks funny. The other side looks like it's getting there. And so now this is what you missed if you didn't see me put together this part. I just dipped that in water. I'm going to use this to rest that there and fold over. Scoring and slipping is the method to attach leather hard clay. So I'm going to use my scoring tool here, and I'm going to score the edge. Dipping it in water softened it up quite a bit because it's such a small object. So I'm going to place that there. This one, it's already been dipped in water, so I'm going to score this. Sometimes I'll dip my scratcher, my serrated rib in the water. All right, so those are scored up and slipped. Now I need to put them together. So I just stuck them together, kind of gently at first. And the key is to use a bit of pressure, but it's tricky with something that's hollow, right? And so I'm going to put a finger inside to support the seam, and then I'm going to pinch that seam together. I'm trying to figure out the best way to show you here. Like that. That's pretty good. Now I'm going to take a finger and wipe it across. This is also good across the seam. So I can scrape across at an angle, or at a right angle to the seam, or at 45. Go back at the other 45, and then remove this. Just like I was doing on that other seam. So that's there. Now I need to do the bottom. When you score and slip, you should see slip coming out of the seam. That's, if you don't see slip coming out of the seam, then you probably don't have enough slip, or pressure, or both. Okay. So now it's together. It's a little mucky and messy. I'm going to clean off my hands. Clean my workspace a little bit. And then I can use the table here, so I don't have to hold it in my hands, and I can work the outside a bit more. I'm using a wooden tool to glide on the surface, so that's good. Now we talked about that the hole in the middle wasn't so good. Actually, this is probably a good tool for it. I was looking for my needle tool. Of course, lost. Oh, it's right here. Let's do that, because you probably have one of these. And so the hole's not so good. But I can put my needle in here and really twist it around. And then my needle's hitting the table, so I can then compress into that. So you might find a stick, a handle of a paintbrush, something like that to work around. And then I can twist this. Sometimes I'll turn the needle over and use the handle, and I can really open that up a little bit. A little bit of water in that dry end. And making sure that that seam at the end is really strong, because that's the weakest part, is the end of the seam. Open that up, back up a little bit. Small teapot, you want a small opening for the tea, but it should be bigger than a pencil in any case. Otherwise you get a tiny little stream. It's going to shrink in the firing too. So I just want to get it much closer, and then I can finish it actually after I put it on the pot. And so now I can hollow out more of the inside after it's together. If I let this firm up, it might even be a little easier. But we'll just do this now. And I can look at my seam and see if there's any problems on the inside. It looks okay. All right. So a little messy, but a good basic form. So now a little bit of cleanup. A wet finger. A little paintbrush would be handy if you had one. I don't think I do. I should. There it is. It's a little paintbrush. I can go in there for the spot where my finger can't reach, actually. All right, so that was solid. I hollowed it out. It's shaped like that. It's actually really similar to the one I made by slabs, right? So two ways to do it, slab or hollow. And let's put the teapot on here and choose which one to use, because I could use either one. How's my handle doing? Pretty good. Checking my handle, make sure it's not dried out too much. So let me show you something before I get to the slab. When you're making the teapot, if you can, make the spout, the handle, and the lid all around the same time. So in other words, don't complete one in its entirety. Try to design all three related and then finish them all together. So I haven't cut my lid yet. This is a closed form of the lid, but I marked it where it's cut because I need to make sure that it lined up properly and all that. But I'm going to leave it that way so I can kind of really secure in there. So what about the tea coming out of this thing? So there's all kinds of ways to do the hole. The simplest way on your first teapot is to simply cut it out. So I have a mark here of where that's going to attach, but let's double check with the one that I made. So yeah, my mark is still the same. And I like my the one I hollowed out. I'm going to use that one. So we're still good. And you can see it actually left a mark here, right there when I put it on there, of the inside of the spout. So it's like that. Now, you could take a knife and just cut that whole hole out, and that's fine. Just don't cut it too big, because then it'll be weak when you attach it. But if you're using loose leaf tea, that's not going to work too good. The small Chinese teapots are made for solid loose leaf tea. So I'm going to use a hole cutter. We use a drill bit. Let's use a drill bit because I found one, and that's something you might have. There's all kinds of different hole cutters, but let's use this one. And in the leather hard clay, you can just twist the bit in your hand and carve it through. Twist it through, I should say. And then don't put the holes too close to each other because they'll be weak. The section between the holes could break. This always reminds me of a rotary phone. Some of you probably say, what is he talking about? Old school phones. You stick your finger in the hole, you twist it around. And look at that, I got a spot right in the middle for my last hole. Alright, so lots of ways to do this. That's the way I chose for this one. And we'll clean up the inside later. So my marks and my holes. And let's put the spout on. So, scoring and slipping. So I am going to score up the section on the pot that I'm going to connect that spout to. Scratch it real good. Okay, and then I'm going to dip this in water and use my serrated rib here and really scratch and wet. So I'll build a slip on the spout side. More convenient. You can build it on either side or both, but it's convenient for me to do it this way, so that's what I'm going to do. Let's get a little water on here too with the paintbrush. So scoring and wetting, and scoring is a good way to build a sticky, grippy surface. I think of it like Velcro. So you need the scratches, and then you need the slip is like the fibers that stick in the Velcro, and the scratches are like the hooks, hook and loop or whatever they call that. Okay, so I'm going to take my finger and clean up the inside. Got a little break there on my seam. I was being reckless. The seam is still weak because I just did it. If I had set this aside for a while, it'd be stronger. But I'm going to fix that seam by pressing it in and then attending to it when I get it back. I'm going to put a mark here to remind myself to fix that with a little more compression after I stick it on here. Last chance to clean up the inside. Cool. All right, you guys ready? So now, simply stick it on here and give it a little bit of pressure and a little twist maybe. Push it. And don't push too hard like I just did, because you'll dent it in. You can't push it back out, but you can push on other areas. If you let that firm up a little bit more, you might have an easier time than I did. Timing is everything. There's multiple times you can do stuff. You can put a spout on when it's still a little bit soft, but the disadvantage is that you might smush it. The advantage is that you can reshape it right now, so you don't have such stiff stuff. I like to work kind of on the soft side so that I can reshape and press it in. Okay, so now I'm going to go around the ring here, and I'm trying not to smear the slip into the clay pot, the teapot body. I'm going around the actual spout. Okay. So now I can think about the height of my spout. Let's double check that, right? I said I wanted the bottom of the spout to be about the height of the, so let's push it down a little bit. And then I can work the end of this at any point before it's too hard. Okay, so let's call that a spout. Got some marks to erase. Okay, I'm going to clean this up, the slip, later, not right now. Let's do the handle. And I'm going to use this for my convenience. And you guys can see pretty good too. So what about getting this handle on there? I think I put the spout just a tiny bit high. Put the handle on in the same way. So that was there. I forgot to show you how to make the handle. So let's do that, and then we'll put it on. Okay, so I have a little bit of clay here. This is different than the pulled handle on a lot of pottery. Wheel thrown stuff use a lot of water. Not always, but usually people make pulled handles where they pull it with water and then pull it down. I made that one just by handling. So I just took a coil of clay, just squeezed it, and made it a little bit tapered. I'm going to pull that off. And then I'm going to use the table. So it's kind of like rolling a coil, but I'm just smoothing it out. So it's fat. So let's use this as an example. It's way bigger than my end handle, so I don't need all of this. But I can use the table surface here and flatten this. And pinch. So I do a lot of pinching. And it's going to match the pinched quality and the hand-built quality of my teapot. All right. So let's use this as a guide for myself, and I'm going to bend a handle about the same. Okay, it needs to be a little bit thinner. And this is where you like could hold it up to your pot and kind of eyeball it and things like that. So if you get little wrinkles, smooth them out. And then now, let's shape it in a similar way. So let's go to the edge here. So often I will make a mock-up, like a test run first. And even if it's not perfect, I use it for the sizing, just like I'm doing here. And so then this, a cut there. So now we're in the ballpark, right? There's the one I'm actually going to use. There's the other one. They're similar. And I can use this too to fatten up the connection point by pushing down into the table. And then I would bring my teapot over. Then I would just stick it on here and really shape it to what I wanted. Go through. So not bad, a little bit fatter than the other one, but you get the idea. So that's how I did it, and I stick them on there temporarily, but be careful because they'll fall off, right? If it works okay, you can do that. Otherwise, you got to make sure you gently lean it to the side or have it rest like a rainbow to dry a little bit, and then you can attach it like this. So that was. You notice I didn't really use any water at all to make the handle. It was a dry, hand-built handle. Okay, so I'm back to my plan here. Okay, so same deal, scoring and slipping. But this time I don't have to drill any holes. Can't tell you how many students I've had that have made their first teapot and got it out of the kiln and then realized they didn't cut the hole for the spout. It's happened like 2 or 3 times. And I say, well, it was still a good exercise. You learn to make a teapot, except for the functional part. So I scratched it up really good. And then I wet that. How am I doing on time? 45-minute video so far. I'm going to finish this teapot. This is the second video I did today because the other one didn't work somehow, as you noticed in the beginning of my talk, and that was about an hour long. I sincerely hope that's not the same case here. Okay, so I'm dipping the end of the handle in water. And looking for my, oh, there it is, scoring tool here. Looks pretty good. One more dip. Whenever you're adding the water, it softens it up. And now I start with the top, and I'm really impressing. Because it's a closed form, I haven't cut the lid. It has a lot of strength for me to push pretty good. Okay. And now I'm going to press this one on. I really want to press it. So I do it the same way that I do the spout in terms of the visible connection. I don't smooth and smear it in. I want them to look like they were attached. Now I'm looking straight to make sure my handle is lined up with my spout. And it is. And then I'm going to think about grabbing this handle. Pretty good for 2 fingers for me, but it's going to shrink. And I can gently reshape my handle if I need to. But I have to be careful if it's firmed up, which it has. Not to do too much, it'll crack. You have to give it a feel, see what the clay is willing to do for you before you do any kind of drastic pinching or moving or reshaping. This space right here is really important for comfort. So is the underside of the handle to not be too sharp. So I'm softening those internal areas, giving a little more space. And when doing all that, my bottom pulled away. So I need to push that down, squeeze it back on. See how I wiggle it and really use a lot of pressure? Really press. I attached the bottom of the handle right on that line that I had designed in. It's a good guideline for design if you have a horizontal line or edge, change in form, any of those things. Attach your handles there if it makes sense in placement. If it's anywhere close to where you're going to put the handle, try to put it like on or really close to the line. All right. So that's looking pretty good. I'm going to do something real quick. I'm going to give it just a little bit of heat. That'll allow me to finish it in the video. Dry those wet spots. I can finish it for you. Okay, so how about the lid? I made a mark where I plan to cut the lid. Now, I could cut it like a jack-o'-lantern, like a pumpkin, at an angle so the lid doesn't drop in. That's a good way to go. Actually, I think I had a change in mind. I was going to roll a coil and add the coil on that line and then cut through the coil. But I think that might be a little too much for this. I like the lines that I have already, so I'm going to stick with this. So often I'll change my design plan as I see the piece be created, do what's best for it. Okay, so like the jack-o'-lantern, you want to cut it at an angle. So don't cut it straight down, right? Because the lid will just fall into itself. But if you cut it at an angle, then I'm going to cut it. Let's see. I feel like my lid's a little bit small. Okay, I'm going to cheat here and use the wheel to give me a line that's a little bit wider. So I'm going at the wide line. Sometimes cutting can be tricky because there's a lot of drag on your knife. If you use an X-Acto knife, then you'll have less drag. If you sometimes going back and forth like in a sawing motion is helpful. That's what I'm doing. Sometimes that creates problems. Just depends on how sticky or firm your clay is. I'm going to put a finger here because that side's starting to fall, to move around. And we have cut it free. Now here's the thing. If I took this off, how am I going to know which direction to put it on because I have a pretty symmetrical thing going on here, but it's not going to line up right perfectly. So what I need to do is make a register, some little mark. I'm going to take 2 little tiny bowls of clay. I'm going to dip them, let's see, make sure they're the same size. And dip them in water. And I'm going to put one on this quadrant. And I'm going to use the back of this paintbrush and really push it on like a button. Dip it in water. If it's something really tiny and you're really pressing on, you don't need to score. The water and the pressure will do the job. I may change these later because I'm not sure if I like the way they look, but you get the idea. So now there's a register telling you where to put your lid. I think I'll change those later. So let's get this lid off of here. It's stuck because I got a little water on there. So I just need to break the seal a little bit. I think there we go. So now the lid is out, and I got all kinds of things to do in this thing. So you can see how thick my wall is. Not a thin teapot, and that's okay because it's kind of a exercise as well. I don't want to work too thin. The other slab one I made was much thinner and it would maybe be a little bit nicer functionally if it was a little bit thinner. But this could be carved out. So let me show you what it looks like in there. So I don't know if you can see. There's the seam of the 2 halves that I put together of the pinch pots. I can now access that seam and clean it up, and it's soft enough that it's perfect. I can use this wooden knife and I can remove a little bit of clay like that. So I would spend some time. A tool that might be handy is the same way that I carved out the spout. I can use this, and there's a little bit of a inner seam that's showing, and I can spend some time and really carve it. I can see all that. Other than that, it actually looks pretty good in there. Now the holes that I cut or drilled through with the drill bit, they're really mucky. Here, if I can do something here. Let's see if I can get some more light in for you guys. That's my heat lamp light. I wonder if you can see in there. There you go. I'm not going to clean up those holes right now because it'll just make a mess. The clay's too soft. So I'm going to let the clay firm up and clean those out later with the trimming tool. So, but what I would do now is go through here and remove clay from the seam. So using the carving tool, get that out of there, and using the wooden tool to kind of compress. So if your teapot's thicker than you want it to be, right? If you have access through your lid, you might be able to carve it out. That's fine. Or you can leave it the same thickness that I have is not a problem whatsoever. So you get the idea. I would clean that up, and I'm going to do that later. I can also clean up my cut edge with a wet finger, but I don't want to alter the shape too much. And I think I'll fix my register later, and I'll show you guys later what the piece is like after I get it to my liking. So that smoothed it out, and then get rid of those sharp edges, especially on the inside of the lid and stuff like that. So a little bit of work is going to make that much nicer. The same is true on the lid itself. If it's firm enough, you can get a wet finger and smooth it, and then smooth off the inside and outside. I kind of like the clover shape that the lid created. That was my design for the whole piece, and it kind of relates the lid to the overall teapot. And of course I have that register, right? And so then I can drop that back down to the register. I had that first line. I'm glad I opened my lid up a little bit. I need to remove my line if I don't like it. I had a guideline that is there, but I can just kind of move those with the tool. So anyway, clean up, clean up, clean up. You get the idea. And then the last cleanup to do would be the seam of the spout and the handle. Boy, that's mucky down there. Looks like I need a little bit of clay added. So I'm going to roll a little bit of a coil here, dip it in water, add it underneath because I scored a little aggressively there apparently, and smush that in, and then use my finger. But I want to keep the spout attachment line real strong. So I'll use a tool and remove this slip. There's different advantages to doing this when it's still a little bit soft versus firmed up. Firmed up works too. You kind of scratch it off. When it's soft, you can kind of smooth and scrape away. And then I lost my line here. Fake it. So a lot of hand building is knowing when to stop. If you keep working and working and working, you might end up with a really refined piece, and that can work nicely for some pieces. But sometimes the freshness of your first moves is lost, and I try not to overwork things if at all possible. I have a tendency to do that. I think a lot of people do. Let me move this line a little bit more and show you guys the somewhat finished product. And we'll wrap it up. Okay, so one last thing is that when I put this lid on here, if this is a teapot and I pour it, the lid can fly off, right? So I'm going to put this back on, I got all soft. What you can do is make a little tab to hold it in. Here's a teapot that has the same cut type of lid, and it has a little tab that slides under there. It's not the most secure lid, but it does work, and it holds it, right? And you keep it coming out. There's a lot of other ways you can attach a flange, like on the Yixing teapots, right there. So you could figure out how to do that on the cut one that I did, but that would be another lesson for another day. So the little tab of clay, you want to add it, scoring and slipping, of course. Add it